Yo, have you had your dose of pep today? No? Don't worry. I got you. Let's go. Hey, y'all, what's good? What's good in your world? What are you thankful for? What good happened this week? What are you looking forward to? I want to know. I really want to know what you're thankful for and what you're looking forward to about this week. Yo, welcome to the Pep Talk Podcast. I'm your host, Coach Jay, and the mission of this podcast is to cheer you on and coach you up. And I say this every time we're together, but it doesn't make it any less true. Y'all, I want to see you win. In your mind, in your body, in your emotions, in your soul. I want you to be able to declare that this is my winning season, regardless of what you're dealing with at this very moment. Better is always around the corner. And as we train our minds to believe it, our eyes will begin to look for it and find it. Yo, if this is your first time listening to the podcast, welcome. We're glad to have you here, y'all. You can catch us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify. Now we've just added Google Podcast, Amazon Podcast, iHeartRadio Podcast. Y'all, we're everywhere that you can listen to podcasts, even Black with No Chaser Radio at 8 a.m. and 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time on Monday morning. Y'all, we're everywhere. So we're glad to have you here with us. You could be listening to any other podcast in the world, but you've chosen to rock with us, and I am thankful for that. And you have been officially deputized into the Pep Squad and are hereby authorized to bring hope, encouragement, cheer, and challenge into any environment that you find yourself in. So listen, after last week's episode on personal accountability, I had a moment. I go back and I listen to these episodes, and I try to glean something from them that I can put into action in my life as well. Because when I give these episodes, I'm not just talking to you, I'm talking to myself as well, because I want to be accountable to my mission and to my vision and to my purpose. And as I listened to last week's episode about personal accountability, and if you haven't listened to it yet, please go back and listen to episode 15. It's crazy good. So I sat down to brainstorm what this week's episode would look like. And I remembered something about me. So when we were expecting our second child, my first son, I was so nervous. See, not only was it another child, and if you have more than one child, I think you can identify with the fear of what if I don't have enough love for two children, right? But it was compounded by the fact that I was having my first son. And as someone who struggled with the whole idea of manhood for my entire life, I was filled with fear as to not just what man and masculinity were, but also how I could help my son and now sons navigate something that I myself don't really have a grip on. And I know that I'm not by myself with that. And over the years, I have felt this intense duty to help men who, like me, have sometimes had real struggles with the idea of defining manhood. And after last week's episode, I remembered that promise to myself. I've tried writing books about this topic in the past, but they've always stalled out. And I think it's because instead of writing, I need to talk about it. And I think this podcast can be a really good vehicle for speaking directly to men. And I feel accountable to my personal mission to help men, because I feel like I am my brother's keeper. So for the next however many episodes, it may be 2, it may be 3, it may be 4, we're going to be going into a series that I think I want to call For Men and the People Who Love Us. And in it, we're going to talk about issues that men deal with. Now, my goal is not to alienate women or anybody else, but I really specifically want to encourage men to elevate. And I promise the things that we talk about are going to be good for anybody. But if you will allow me, I'm really speaking from my heart, because I think men, we need coaching on what manhood and masculinity really looks like. Because these are things that we don't often talk about. We may think about them within our hearts, but we don't really talk about them. And so I really want to talk to the bros. I really want to talk to the brothers out there, to the men, to the old men, to the young men, to the future men. And so I need your help, okay? So I need you to get these next 3-4 episodes out to the men in your life. If there are men in your life that you love, that you value, that you want to see grow, I need you to help me by tagging them on my social media posts. I need you to help me by sending them the episodes directly, send them the links, and tell them you need to listen to this. Because I really feel in my heart, I feel really strongly in my heart that these next few episodes are really going to help a lot of men. But they can't help them if we can't get these episodes into their hands and get them listening to it on their phones, computers, or whatever. So I need your help. Can I depend on you to help me with this, Pep Squad? Yeah? Okay, that's why I love y'all. Y'all ride for me. So when we come back, we're going to address the first topic in this series. And I think I'm going to call it man versus vulnerability. I like that. All right, so you know what I'm going to say? Jam to the music, people. Jam to the music, because it's bomb. It's bomb. This is episode 16 of the Pep Talk Podcast. I'm your host, Coach Jay, and we will be right back after you finish chair dancing. Be right back. And we're back. Episode 16 of the Pep Talk Podcast. And as I said in the opener, I want to take these next few episodes and really be a cheerleader and definitely a coach for the fellas out there. So this is why we're doing this series that I want to call For Men and the People Who Love Us, because I want to challenge men, myself included, to be better, because I know we can. Like, the people who love us and put up with us also know that we can be better. But more importantly, they don't just know it, they need us to be better. The environments that we find ourselves in, the circles that we walk in, demand that we be better. And there's a lot to unpack in this episode. We're talking about vulnerability, but I'm going to try to be respectful of your time and keep this episode as concise as possible while still accomplishing the mission that I have for this episode. So today we are talking about vulnerability. And I want to start by saying that I always thought that I was a vulnerable man. As someone who has always been comfortable with my emotions. Like, I don't have any issues crying. You know what I'm saying? I don't have any issues addressing my emotions. When I got married, I quickly learned that I was not as vulnerable as I thought that I was. Marriage will teach you some things, man. Now, I'm not the grunting, super masculine, I'm not that guy, right? I don't necessarily have the machismo, genetic expression. I'm quiet and I'm observant. But when I got married, I learned that I do have a problem with being vulnerable. Like, it could be something as simple as allowing my wife to take care of me when I'm sick. Y'all, I will try to keep going even if I am crawling on my hands and knees to the kitchen to try to cook dinner, because I don't want to be a burden to anybody, particularly my wife. I don't want to be a burden to people. So I try to keep going. I don't want to be perceived as weak. I want to be valuable in the eyes of other people. And this stretches not just from my marriage. This stretches, also into my workplace. I'm quiet about stuff that I probably should speak up about, because I don't want to be perceived as a burden to someone else. And earlier this year, I had a really bad bout with sickness. I'm a type 2 diabetic, and due to some issues that were outside of my control, I didn't have meds. So being what I thought was a man, I tried to mask my symptoms and just keep going and ignore what my body was telling me. Men, y'all hear me? So I kept ignoring what my body was telling me until my body revolted. And I think that this revolt was so sudden and jarring that for the first time in about 20 years of marriage, I was practically begging my wife to take care of me, to let me lay in her lap. Like, and even then, there was a measure of shame that accompanied that request. And I talk about shame here because, according to researchers, it is the shame that keeps us from being fully vulnerable. And here's how shame shows itself, because it's not a one-size-fits-all issue. But shame tells us that when we have to ask for help, then we aren't good enough. When we can't pay a bill, we aren't good enough. We're not wealthy enough. When we are struggling on a job or in the classroom, we aren't smart enough or skilled enough. We aren't good enough. When we're struggling, to find a significant other, we aren't desirable enough. Shame tells us that whatever enough is, we aren't it. It's a veritable tightrope that we are constantly swaying on, men. And where this intersects with vulnerability is that we have this stigma within us that is as old as time, that allowing any piece of this armor of manhood to come off leaves us exposed. And where that exposure sits open, shame enters to close it up. For men, shame equates to weakness. And Lord, help us if we ever appear to be weak. But you may be sitting there listening saying, Jay, I cry. Like when Jodeci said, baby, I will cry for you tonight. I cry. I watch rom-coms. Bro, I've seen The Notebook 100 times. Matter of fact, I keep a notebook now because I watched The Notebook so many times, man. I'm in touch with my emotions. So I don't deal with shame. I'm vulnerable, bro. I'm plenty vulnerable. Okay, here's a litmus test. Ask your loved ones, the people who love you, the people who know you, ask them if you are vulnerable. Because vulnerability is not about whether you cry or not. It's about how comfortable you are expressing your feelings in a given situation. Vulnerability comes from the Latin word that literally means wound. So there's a part of it that's supposed to hurt, but it's a hurt that leads to healing. See, vulnerability is a person's willingness to open up, even though it may hurt you to do so in that moment. So just based on that definition, vulnerability is about more than you having emotions, or better, your ability to feel them. So I came across an Australian website called menandrelationships.com. And I found some interesting information about the two types of men and how they relate to emotional vulnerability. And I'll put a link to the article on the show notes. Most men fall into one of these two categories, and there's some overlap between them. But ideally, men are either dismissive of their emotions or they are disapproving of their emotions. Dismissive men view their feelings as trivial in the grand scheme of things. They don't want to bother people with their emotions because everybody has emotions and they don't want to be a burden to anybody. So they find ways to distract themselves from those emotions. They know they have feelings, but they're too busy trying to keep up appearances to allow themselves to be vulnerable enough to deal with them. Now, disapproving men restrict their emotions, and they restrict them so tightly that the only emotions that they tend to allow to manifest are anger or depression. Now, there's a lot more to these types, but I want you to ask yourself, which one of those two men are you? Personally, I'm a dismissive man when it comes to my emotions. I feel them, yes, I know they're there, but I don't like bothering people with the way that I'm feeling. I like to process them myself, but never talk about them, which is not a good practice to have. Neither type is healthy. Neither type of man is free, and both types of these men deal with trauma because of how they choose to deal with those emotions. Man, if you fall into either of those types, you're walking a dangerous line, and it always catches up to us. Your body was not made to carry a capacity of emotions inside of you. Your mind was not made to sift through a large wave of emotions, and it has so much other stuff to do, right? Um, and by the way, you're not as good as hiding it as you think. Actually, guys, we are terrible, or as Charles Barkley says, terrible at hiding how we feel. So why do we even try? Like, I know I've said this a lot, brothers, but this is a discussion that we need to be having. And for the people out there who have men in your life that you love, I need you to stay right here because we're going to unpack this some more when we come back. This is episode 16 of the Pep Talk Podcast. I'm your host, Coach Jay. Today we're talking to the men and the people who love us. We'll be right back. We're back. Thank you for being with us. We are steadily unpacking this idea of man versus vulnerability. Now, here's some truth for you. Men want to be vulnerable, right, guys? We want to be vulnerable, right? We don't want to hold all this stuff inside. But we have a hard time balancing what safety is and what it is not. Men, the problem stems from, again, our deep-seated misunderstanding of what manhood is. Media would tell us that it is tough, but even that toughness has been misrepresented. And the more we buy into the image of manhood based on societal norms and demands, the more depressed we will become, the more repressed we will become, and the more isolated we will become. Guys, suicide rates among men are still alarmingly high because men either cut their emotions off and dismiss them, or they feel them and don't feel comfortable expressing them. Guys, your lack of vulnerability is killing off parts of you, but I get it. You want to know that you are safe. Understand this. Vulnerability is an essential piece of the manhood puzzle. If you are dismissing or disapproving of your emotions, then 9 times out of 10, you're rejecting an essential piece of yourself. And unless you can accept yourself, you will never find a situation where you will ever feel safe enough in order to be truly vulnerable. Remember, it's not just about feeling the emotions. It's about feeling safe enough to express them. Therefore, if you can't even allow yourself to feel them, then Houston, we have a problem. So a lack of vulnerability expresses itself in many ways. It can be not applying for the job because you don't feel qualified, not writing your true feelings in an email, not asking for help, not speaking up when you feel out of control and spiraling, not asking your partner about their fears and dreams, not telling your partner what upsets you about them, or not being courageous. And a lot of these stem from a fear of rejection. Men often think that by letting people in, people won't like the real them or understand their real feelings. So we give the world and the people around us a form of us that we feel is more palatable. I'm going to say this clearly, and I need you to hear me, guys. Listen to me carefully. If you are around people who can accept you as you are, then you need new people. Life is too short and is filled with too much stress for us to be further complicating life by putting on masks every single day of our lives. The right people will love you as you are. They will love you whether you say what they do want to hear or what they don't want to hear. They will love you when you cry or laugh. They will love you through depression and healthy anger. They will love you, men, and you are worthy of that kind of love. You are worthy of not having to wear a mask every day of your life. You are worthy of vulnerability, and you have to seek it out because otherwise you will never find the fulfillment that you were meant to have, which will convolute everything else in life. When we have gaps in our lives and we have backed up crowded areas in our lives, it stems the tide of creativity, brilliance, love, and life. And like I said, I'm talking to myself too. So, how do we move toward being vulnerable? And I understand a lot of us have never seen vulnerability modeled before us. I understand it. But just because we've never seen it, men, listen, hear me. Just because we haven't seen it doesn't mean that it's okay for us to continue perpetuating the cycle of it missing from our lives. People are watching. Your sons and daughters are watching. They deserve to see a father who knows how to be vulnerable with himself and with them. Your wives, your girlfriends deserve to see vulnerability. You deserve to be vulnerable. It's a gift. So now let's talk about how to move toward being vulnerable. And before I begin, listen, you may need a therapist. And if you're thinking that at some point in this podcast, great. We all need therapy. I need it too. And if you can do that right now, I say go for it. Enthusiastically. I stand. I stand for therapists. I'm a therapy fan. And I enthusiastically encourage you to do so. But if you're not in a position to do that yet as your coach, here are some ideas to help you move forward in being vulnerable. Number one, find safety. Vulnerability requires safety. If you have people around you who have been riding with you and riding for you, they are positive additions to your life. I'm willing to bet that they want what's best for you and are willing to provide that safety for you. You never know unless you try. Push past the fear and seek out a community of safety. Maybe it's with other men. See, I know that I have never been healthier than when I had a strong group of men around me to help me not only be accountable, but also be vulnerable. I can talk to them in the rawness of my feelings because they get it. And then it really helps me to express myself to my wife sometimes. There are times when I don't know if I can come to her with the full thing, but when I talk to my guys, they help me understand some things and I can get right to the issue with my wife and the conversation is fruitful. It just makes me better. My bros help me. And you have to have people in your life who can help you. And this leads to strategy number 2, journal. Listen, you need an outlet. Bottling up the emotions, it's not working for you. It's not a good look out here in these streets. And I'm a huge proponent of journaling. You don't have to be a writer. Nobody is critiquing your grammar. This is just a way for you to clear your head and your heart. Number 3, commit to total honesty. This is a hard one, but I want you to make a promise to yourself right now that you're going to be totally honest. When people ask you how you feel, quit saying, "Oh, I'm good." Just stop it. Just stop. Stop. If they don't want to hear the truth of how you're doing, that's a them problem. That's not a you problem. But we have to stop putting band-aids over our emotions and our feelings because we don't think people want to hear. There are more people in your life than you think who want to know how you are really doing, what you are really wrestling with. And when you're wrestling with your emotions, be honest about it. Be honest to yourself. When you disagree with something someone says, tell them. When your feelings are hurt, explain them. Accept that your feelings are valid and you have a right to them. You have a right to healthily express them. Notice I said healthily. Okay? We're not putting anybody in danger because of the way that we're feeling. We find a way to healthily express our feelings in a way that does not physically or emotionally harm another person. Again, a therapist can help you through this. Number 4, face your fears. Do I need to say more about this one? That job that you've been telling yourself that you're not qualified for, man, you better put your name in for it. That woman that you look at, that you're like, man, I'm not man enough for her. Have you tried? Get over yourself. Get over your fear. Go try it. Ask her out. Go for that job. Have that conversation. Ask for that promotion. A part of vulnerability is pushing past your fears. And then number 5, push back against the feelings of isolated. You are not an island. You were not created to be an island. In no shape, form, or fashion does your life work better when you are an army of one. Do you hear me? You need people. Yo, we have unpacked a lot today. And as I said in the beginning, I want to see you win, brothers. Brothers, manhood is not cookie cutter, but we can all do a better job of being men. And my challenge is that you will stick with me over these next few weeks as I do my best to encourage and coach us to be better for ourselves and for the people who love us. And if you're one of the people who are loving us and you've listened to this podcast, thank you. We need you in our lives. We value you being in our lives. Thank you. And I free you to hold us accountable to being vulnerable. And also, I can't say this enough, y'all. This information is for us all. I just feel called to really speak to men because there's another level. Let's get it. Let's go. The world is waiting on you to be fully actualized, and being vulnerable is a huge part of it. Our quote for today comes from acclaimed speaker and author, Dr. Brené Brown, and I love this one. She says, "Vulnerability is the birthplace of creativity, innovation, and change." So if you're not feeling innovative and creative, if you're not feeling like the change agent that you were meant to be, check your vulnerability. Boom. Mic drop. All right, so we're going to start closing out. I want to thank you for rocking with us today for episode 16 of the Pep Talk podcast. I love y'all so much, guys. I love you so much, and I need you to come back next week, episode 17, where we talk about what I think is an integral issue as it relates to manhood. And I'm going to call the episode Men and the Broken Mirror. Men and the Broken Mirror. Y'all, I love you so much. Let me know what you think about this episode. Hit me up at thepeppodcast@gmail.com. Hit me up on Instagram @_JBSpeaks. I need to hear from you. I want to know what y'all thought about the episode. What's working for you? Remember, you can catch us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon, iHeartRadio Podcast, and now even Google Podcasts. So there's no reason why you should not be listening to the podcast. Y'all, I love you so much. I want to see you win, and I want to challenge you, men. Let's win together. And the people who love us, I need you to share this episode. Share this episode. I also need y'all to like, rate, review, comment. Let us know how you're liking what we're doing. We need you. We need you to keep this train rolling. You all are as integral a part of this process as anything, and I need you, and I love you. And so to close out, like I always do, y'all, keep it love, keep it light, and keep it peppy. We'll see you next week for the next episode of the Pep Talk Podcast. I'm your host, Coach Jay. I love you. Peace.